It's a good evening when I'm recording this. My name is Sarah Namboozo, PhD student, public policy. This is my presentation on my macroeconomics term project on the impact of COVID-19, or call it coronavirus, on the macroeconomic policies. And my case study was the United States of America. As you know, COVID-19 has impacted the whole globe. Developing and developed countries have been, to a large extent, negatively impacted. I must profess that some businesses have had their bloom during this pandemic, and those include mainly the virtual systems or the virtual apps, like the internet online apps. Amazon, for example, in cases where people have not physically been picking things up, they've been relying on online sales, online shopping. So Amazon, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all the online internet apps must have made their highest revenues during this pandemic. If they haven't, then I doubt they ever will. So, but to a large extent, the economy has been negatively impacted. As you all know, macroeconomics is not entirely about just the money or the figures. It's also about the happiness index of the economy, or the people in the economy, and that has been negative during this pandemic. People have been frustrated, mental health cases have been reported, death has amounted to more than 500,000 people. These are parents, these are business owners, these are investors, and these are contributors of the economy. And more than 31 million people have tested positive of coronavirus. These include people that will suffer permanent or continual effects, some that have probably had trauma out of it, some whose lifestyles have entirely changed because of the pandemic, and to a large extent, the coronavirus or the COVID-19 has negatively impacted the community or the economy. In this same regard, given this being a term paper, I would like to condole with all those students that have lost, or my professors that have lost anyone to this pandemic. I condole with you, and I hope that you get through this, or we all get through this period. So in this paper, I looked at the causal factors surrounding the pandemic. To me, I think that the greatest implication of COVID-19 was the way it spread from one person to another, because that is entirely the reason why we saw mandatory lockdowns, why we saw businesses being shut down, because it was not just a pandemic, but it was a pandemic that could easily contract one person from that could easily be contracted by one person from another, just through touch, just through being close to each other, just through the air breath, or it was the way it was being spread that was, or that is still, because it's still with us, and I doubt if we are going to easily disperse it or get away with it. We hope for that, but for now, the way it spread is the greatest threat of the COVID-19, and this led to mandatory close downs of every business sector that was declared non-essential, ranging from transportation, public transportation, to hospitality industries, the hotels, the casinos, the clubs, the games, football games and basketball games. All those industries, entertainment industries, have been negatively impacted because they fell under the non-essential categories, and these were employing thousands and thousands of employees who had to be put on either teleworking, that is working from home, or some that were actually laid off because businesses were closing down and sales were not coming in during this pandemic. Housing, for example, my apartment had to give us discounts for the first wave. So I believe that the housing industry lost a great deal on revenues. And when we look at the government expenditures, the latest I checked was more than $1.3 trillion has been dispersed already, and another more than $1 trillion is underway. So more than $2.3 trillion has been allocated to be spent on this pandemic. So that is a huge expenditure to have amassed just out of the pandemic, or something that had not been planned. We go ahead to, I got my data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, National Bureau of Economic Research, Bureau of Economic Analysis, and also other scholars' literature, just to compare and see the rates, the GDP, the revenues, the expenditures on the government, the health implications, the economic implications. And that's where I got my data. And I draw my my conclusions on the lessons learned from this pandemic. I also include different macroeconomic indicators, the GDP, I have the charts, the GDP, the unemployment rates, which are actually going down given the huge injection of money that the government has actually invested in the economy. So the government has really done its part. The Federal Reserve has done its part in regaining people's trust, because at the beginning of the pandemic, we ran out of items, especially water, food items, and other basic items from big shopping centers like Walmart. So we anticipated maybe a draw out on the money, but we haven't experienced a huge financial crisis during this pandemic. And I think that is bravo to the Federal Reserve that has kept up with that part. And the stimulus checks that have been injected have probably kept some people on payroll even when businesses are not making profit. So the greatest implication on my side was the death of the people that were lost during this pandemic, and those that have lost their loved ones, businesses that were closed down, some that will never recover because they've completely gone out of business, and employees that were laid off permanently, because now so many self-checkouts may never actually need anybody else to come onto those jobs, and some of those jobs have completely been phased out during this pandemic. That concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.